So thank you to everybody who has taken the time out to come and participate in the seminar. This series was started by the Education Community Committee, which is associated with the Public Relations Institute of Australia. And it's a group of academics and industry professionals who are trying to foster a better connection between industry and academic research. So that's the purpose of the seminars. And they're intended to be very, very informal network sharing. So it's not a case of, we very often have really good discussions, and it's intended to be quite a relaxed, informal talk about our stuff and just a way to share information. So, and I will record the information and put it up on our site and send out the links. But with no further ado, I will hand over to Associate Professor Karen Freberg, who has very kindly agreed to talk us through social media and education. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's an honor to be here, and I am really excited to present on a favorite topic of mine, both from a consulting standpoint and research and teaching based. And I love all aspects of what you guys are doing, for this seminar. I think it's really important to be able to share ideas, share knowledge, and to learn from each other. And I feel what I've been able to get from just the initial conversations that we've had is so much, and I'm really excited to be here. So I think it's kind of timing, just so we're kind of looking at the 2018 just coming up in just a few weeks to kind of look at what are some future trends in terms of looking at balancing research, teaching, and personal branding for professors in education. And so I've shared my slides, and I'm going to be posting them also online. So I really want to be a resource for everyone. So if anyone has any questions after the seminar or after this session, I'd be really more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about me, just to give an overview for everyone. I am an associate professor in strategic communications, and so at the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. So we are known for our horse racing and bourbon. So definitely been a wonderful place to teach and interact with some professionals in social media and digital communication. So I teach mostly in our strategic communication sequence, which involves public relations, advertising, and marketing, but I also teach social media. And so I've been teaching social media at the University of Louisville. Next spring, it will be 5 years, but 6 years overall. I do some research also in the area of social media and social media pedagogy. And I have a few resources at the end of the presentation on some of my work, but also some professors that are really leading the industry and the profession in this area. So I've also had a chance to, collaborate and work as a consultant too in social media, as both looking at social media strategy, influencer marketing, but then I've also spent some time working with fellow educators, but also specific agencies and companies that specialize in higher education and social media, like Hootsuite and Meltwater and HubSpot and Adobe, to name a few. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to kind of see the field grow, especially in social media education and pedagogy. There's still a lot more work that we need to be doing, but it's a lot of fun. And so what I wanted to kind of start off with is, before kind of jumping into discussing some of the trends to think about in 2018 related to social media pedagogy and how can professors become their own micro-influencer, is to kind of look at where we're at right now from a research standpoint. And I think what's really exciting is that social media research in general is becoming more and more popular, especially in, of course, public relations, but we are seeing this growing emphasis in understanding social media education, social media pedagogy. And that while this is continuing to grow in popularity, there's still some challenges that we need to be aware of. What are the different roles? What are the different expectations for professors related to looking at battling these expectations both inside their organization and the industry, where you have to, it seems to be always we're kind of asked to do more with less. And with social media in particularly, it's a very demanding field and it's constantly changing. And so one of the things that I wanted to do here is to, one, talk about some current resources and expectations to keep in mind for 2018, but also provide some resources and communities where professors can come together and say, okay, we're not alone, and to go to various places to connect with other professors who are basically going and doing the same thing. But also, be part of, communities that really help educate and help each other out. So it's been, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about working in this field is that everyone's able to share their ideas, share their perspectives, share their insights. So it's been a lot of fun. I wanted to talk also too about the current state of social media research, specifically in pedagogy. And I actually fell into this line of research a few years ago when I had a couple of colleagues that were asking me, well, how do you know, like, if your assignments are working in the classroom? Have you done research in this area? And I thought, well, no, I haven't really done that before. So that kind of led to my interest in kind of focusing on social media pedagogy. But if you look at the research that has been done already, it really kind of comes down under the umbrella of experiential learning. Like, we are kind of in an industry that is constantly evolving, constantly moving, and people are kind of looking at how students learn by getting their hands into working with social media. What are the real world applications that they can combine into the classroom in their various assignments to improve their understanding and application of these new tools? So most of the research has kind of fallen into other categories in terms of looking at case studies, looking specifically at having students, go through the process of understanding, okay, this is a particular campaign that worked. How can we integrate this as part of a classroom? So they kind of do a case study kind of perspective. But then we also have a lot of research that's looked at in social media pedagogy at specific assignments, whether it is looking at a social media crisis communication simulation exercise or a writing assignment looking at a social media news release. So there's a lot of research out there to kind of look at specifically one assignment. But then we've also seen a rise in identifying what is the actual gap between industry expectations in the field of social media, public relations, marketing, and then what is happening in the classroom. So this has been an area of research that I've done some work in, and I'm fascinated in what strategies we can come together with practitioners and educators to combine, and basically make the bridge stronger between practice and education. And so exploring what are the challenges in teaching social media. We actually looked at and interviewed professors earlier this year, exploring what are some of the challenges in teaching social media, what are some of the benefits. And so a lot of professors said it was very rewarding, but it was a lot of work and they didn't have a lot of industry buy-in. But I also worked on another project with another colleague of mine, Carolyn Kim, and we looked at what are some of the key components or key classes and skills that students need to have in a social media curriculum. And the other thing that I also worked on too is the different perceptions of professors actually using social media. Like, do students want professors to actually be personable and present and transparent on social media and integrate that into the classroom? So there's a lot of opportunities in this field. It's a growing area. I'm excited that there's more interest in social media education, where this wasn't a case maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it's been a really fun area to kind of explore and continue doing research in. So what I wanted to do is kind of talk about 5 future trends that we need to be aware of. It's December 2017. We are going to be entering a new year. And with everything that we're seeing already with social media, there's a lot of changes in the platforms and a lot of different expectations in the industry. I mean, Instagram now allows you to follow hashtags now in your feed. And then Twitter basically updated their tweet storm. So these platforms are constantly changing across the board. But what are some other things that we as professors need to be aware of in approaching social media education for the upcoming year? So I have 5 here. And so what I'm going to do is kind of walk through a couple of examples of these 5 and then kind of summarize, the presentation and then provide some additional resources. I love sharing resources and giving kind of action steps on what we could do to kind of continue this conversation along the ways. And so I have the 5 future trends that I do see for professors to keep in mind, especially in social media education, is first to be a social connector. And I'm going to explain exactly what that entails. being experiential storytellers, providing and sharing a virtual window into your classrooms, be a little bit more transparent in terms of allowing people to see not only what you are doing as a researcher, but how you are teaching and integrating a culture within the classroom. And I'm also going to say one of the big parts of the title was being a micro influencer. How can you gain partnerships with brands and industry professionals as a micro influencer in the education circuit? And then personal branding is a big one. I think more than ever, we have to, as we tell our students that they need to have a personal brand on social and digital, we also need to have one, but kind of looking at how do we basically take that to the next level in 2018, and then basically becoming your own media brand. So I'm actually going to also share with a couple of examples of professors who I think are really doing this very well, and definitely use them as examples of, you know, people that are kind of leading the way in these different trends kind of going forward in the next year. So in terms of social connectors, so the term that I worked with another professor, his name is Dave Raymond. He's wonderful. He's at Drake University. So really what we're looking at is the virtual connectors. And so what I think is really powerful for us is to use social media to help our students make these virtual connections. And whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, we may have students that are coming across various internships and job opportunities, and they just don't know where to go next. Like they might have sent in their application, their cover letter, but then they might say, well, how do I basically get a chance to get to know the people that really I need to know, that I would be inspired to learn more about, hear their journey, hear about their experiences. And that's where for us as professors, we can come together and virtually introduce our students to a professional that we know in our own network. And I use Twitter for that very reason. I have a lot of students that are interested, especially in athletics or the sports industry. And occasionally I've had a chance to look at what their interests are, whether it is tennis or football, soccer. And I basically look at my Twitter contacts and my network of professionals that I keep in touch with. And I say, wow, okay, this student is really interested here. Maybe they need to talk to this person. So I virtually connect them to make sure that they are part of a community, whether it's also getting involved in Twitter chats. And I'm going to list a couple that I really think are really strong to get your students connected to the industry. But essentially what we're doing is we are connecting students with individuals so they can learn more about the business, the industry that they're part of, but also be connected in the community that they're part of. And so I think that's one of the things that we really need to do as educators kind of moving forward in the next year, is that while competition is really high among students for these various jobs and internship opportunities, there is still something that we as professors could do to help them make these connections. And so I have a couple of examples here that I wanted to share with you guys. One is Elaine Young, who's a great professor. And one of the things that I think is important for us to do is kind of foster communities. And the way that we can connect people is not just connecting students with professionals, but connecting professors with other professors and other possible partnerships, kind of similar to what I'll be talking about becoming a micro-influencer. So I have created a social media professors group on Facebook and on Twitter, and I have links to both of those at the end of the presentation. And the reason why I think it's important to connect, professors with professors too, is that everyone's kind of in the same boat. There's really no one unified way of teaching social media, and we're all kind of thinking, okay, how do we approach this? How do we integrate this as part of our classroom? And this actually came about, this community on Facebook, the social media professors group, came up actually for their research. I was interviewing a professor, his name is Chris Wilson, and he said in the interview that he wished that there was a central place where professors can come together who teach social media and bounce around ideas. And he said there's really not one place that he could find where this was available. So I thought, okay, the little light bulb came up over my head. I'm like, well, why isn't there a group? So I created this group in October 2016. It now has about 520 members, which is amazing. And it's really kind of fostered something to really be really cool. And then MEO Jobs, which I'll talk a little bit at the end of the presentation as a resource, is a great resource, posts various internships and jobs. And so they're all over the place at these amazing brands and locations. And I know Mark, who oversees this account, and he's amazing. and been very supportive. And so he's a dean at Hofstra University. And so he actually created a email listserv just for our group, for professors to sign up for internship opportunities and updates that are relevant for us to share with our students. And these kind of partnerships, these connections can foster into wonderful relationships. And I think that we're going to be seeing more of these communities, people are coming together, sharing resources, being collaborative, and really kind of making the field a better place. And I've been really pleased and really excited to see that as someone who teaches social media. And it's been a lot of fun to kind of manage and work on this on the side when I'm not teaching and doing research. It's been a lot of fun seeing and making an impact that way. And so again, experiential storytelling is the second trend that I think what we need to be aware of is how can we show people what we're doing? And I put this down as a trend that we need to be aware of because higher education, I know in the United States, does get a little bit of a negative view in terms of how we're preparing students. Are we being relevant? How are we basically best preparing for the expectations that the industry is holding our students to in terms of high standards in social media? And I can't tell you how many times I've had to have this conversation with industry professionals. And so one way that I think professors can kind of combat this is saying, okay, let us show you what we are doing in our classes so we are preparing our students for the real world. And I think there's a couple of ways we can do that. I think being very active ourselves in Twitter chats, sharing our stories, creating our own content that basically says, hey, here's some of the work that we're doing in our classes. Here's some of the clients, doing various takeovers, having a class video blog to be able to kind of show people what it's like, to essentially be in part of a class. I've also done live lectures through Facebook Live where I've invited professionals to come in and just watch and see a classroom in play so they can feel like, okay, this is what is being covered in this class. And I usually basically crowdsource a topic that students and professionals may be interested in learning about, so then they can ask questions. So it kind of creates a collaborative, transparent environment. I do have another note here, advanced VR in the classroom setting. I think this is kind of where, if you had kind of a virtual reality experience where people could actually sit in the classroom, kind of experience a lecture in 3D, be able to see the atmosphere. I think there's just so many great opportunities here to tell our story. But I think in 2018, we're seeing a lot of people tell us, how higher education is as as a program, in terms of preparing our students for the real world. And I think what we need to do in 2018 as professors and educators in social media education is take ownership of the narrative and say, look, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing to prepare our students for the industry, and let us be part of the experience. So that's something that we need to kind of be aware of. And I wanted to kind of a couple of shout outs to 3 professors who I think are really doing this very well. Ellen Venter is a professor in Colorado in the United States, and she is fantastic in terms of being transparent, open, and sharing what she's doing in the classroom. But I've really been impressed with how she does this through Instagram and Twitter. And what's really cool about each of these professionals that I have here, they're using different platforms to showcase and tell their story, and to be able to invite their, various professionals and other students even to be part of their experience. So Ellen chooses to focus on Twitter and Instagram. Josie is another professor. She teaches online. So of course this comes very naturally for her, but she actually invites people to see her speak at various professional conferences and keynotes. And so she uses Instagram a lot, and she has her own podcast that really is dedicated to higher education and learning. But so she essentially walks the walk and tells her story very well. And so she's very active also on Twitter chats. David Kapperman is at another university in South Dakota, another northern state here in the United States. But what he does is he uses Facebook groups. So he does Facebook Live videos, and he invites speakers to come in and kind of watch how he interacts with the students. And I think being collaborative and transparent, saying, hey, let us, take a virtual seat in my class and let me show you how I approach my class this way. And so I think that the barriers that you do see sometimes, with professors in their classrooms are kind of breaking. And I really think that these three professionals and professors are doing a really good job in showcasing and telling their story uniquely on each of these different platforms. So being a micro influencer, so we're hearing all the time about influencers, influencer marketing. Most of the time we see sports figures, celebrities, or high profile YouTubers getting all of these endorsement and brand opportunities. And so I think that this is, still going to be prevalent, but a micro influencer is different than a regular influencer, where they have essentially more of a niche audience, but they have a hyper engaged community. And we are seeing more brands actually investing in education. More agencies, especially in the PR and social area, are integrating education into their own businesses. So Edelman has a new learning group that they've created. RGA agency is investing more in terms of educating their own employees. Adobe has a whole conference dedicated to education and higher ed. So when you kind of are thinking about this for 2018, that's one of the big things that I wanted to talk about today was how can we become micro-influencers ourselves? So why are we part of this new equation? So I think that for us, we do have a strong presence in the industry. We have a great level of respect in our community. We have students that we're able to mentor and advise. Other people within the industry look to us for research and industry ideas. So we do have a dominant presence in the industry. So I think, why aren't we part of this conversation? And I found too, just reaching out to brands that really do fit your identity, your perspective, and your voice as an educator, and your love, as well as fitting your level of expertise and interest, really the doors are open. I think that really, I think we've kind of been sitting on the backside, on the the sidelines as educators when it comes to influencer marketing, because we feel like, okay, we're educators, but we are seeing, I would say in 2018, this is a huge open market where we just need to look at brands and say, okay, who do we want to work with? Who could possibly be interested in working with us on an education front? And I think just following them on social media, reaching out to the professionals, and share resources on why you are the educator that they need to partner with. And I did this with a couple of brands myself. I started out, almost 5 years ago. I heard about Hootsuite, the Hootsuite Academy and Higher Education Program, actually from a friend of mine. His name is Bill Ward. He was the first that kind of created this certification program for Hootsuite. And I just reached out to him look, I'd love to, partner with you guys. I'd love to use, this program for my social media classes at the University of Louisville. What can we do? And I was trying to also see what would be a win-win situation. I think one of the things that sometimes is, we sometimes forget is kind of what is the win-win situation? What are things that, we can do together? And I think brands, they sometimes, may or may not expect that, but anytime you can create that experience where you say, okay, here's the experience you can give me to, help amplify and support my classroom experience for my students, but here's what we can do for you, so it's kind of a win-win situation. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunities to become a micro-influencer. There's brands like Adobe, like HubSpot, Hootsuite, and many others that are looking hard to find educators who would want to be part of their community. So I think sometimes it just comes down to reaching out to, the brands themselves. And one thing that I wanted to do is kind of showcase a tool that if you're kind of looking at, well, if I'm participating in certain hashtags and communities, who else should I partner with? And so there's a tons of tools for hashtags and to search for various communities. But I like Mention Map. And Mention Map actually, was one of the first Twitter monitoring tools. But they revamped some of their services. They're doing a few other things besides monitoring hashtags. But I wanted to kind of look at here too, I looked at SM Profs, which is a community that I use for the social media professors community. And I wanted to see, okay, who are some influencers, who are some advocates who would be natural to possibly partner with? So that's something that we can do, is kind of look at, okay, here's some hashtags, here's some Twitter chats. Are there any big brands or brands that are actively interested in following and being part of the conversation in the community? Can we reach out to them? So what we have here for SM Profs is that we do have several high-profile individuals. We have Deirdre Breckenridge, Mark Schaefer, two industry professionals that I think are really great. But then we have Social Media Today, Hootsuite, and then Isaac Mochi is a higher education professional with HubSpot. So that, and we have Mashable and Buffer too. So these are just naturally some indications that we can use data. I think data is really important, especially in social media, to look at who are possible collaborations that we could reach out to, who are networks that we could possibly partner up with some sort of influencer initiative. And I think that they're looking for individuals as well. So I think it's a win-win situation for all of us. So this is one tool that I think is really cool. Mention Map also looks at identifying bots on various accounts and gives you reports. And so that's one of the new features that they're coming up with, which is pretty cool. So personal branding, we talk about personal branding all the time for our students. And sometimes I think as educators, we forget, oh yeah, we also have a personal brand. And this is something that I'm very, very much invested in. I feel that personal branding is one of the things that really kind of sets yourself apart. We have to do research. We have to be an expert in the field of our studies and be an effective teacher. But I also think that we also have to identify how we perceive ourselves in the industry. How do we compare for other professors in academia? But I also think a term that Mark Schaefer has discussed a little bit in his work, human interaction marketing. Basically him, like as a way to build relationships. So what we're looking at is taking networking to the next level, looking at the data, like looking at any type of monitoring analytics tool, whether it's Hootsuite or looking at specific Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook analytics and saying, okay, who are your best advocates? Who are people that are your biggest supporters? How can you continually build on your community? And all of us have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and it's important for us to kind of do an audit to kind of see, okay, are we consistently presenting ourselves the same way across all platforms? Are we taking advantage of opportunities that we wouldn't have been able to do possibly? I think that we need to kind of look at what works for us and kind of take our personal branding to the next level. And I tell my students this, but I think it's also important too, to not go for the hard sell. Definitely it's important to reach out to people for a genuine interest that you want to connect with. And so it's just kind of thinking about the personal professionalism that goes with social media, is that if you want to connect with someone, let's say at a big agency like Ogilvy, or if you wanted to go for a big company like Apple, like you don't necessarily want to go for the hard sell, like, hey, I want to get my students internships or anything, but, just generally reach out to people and say, okay, I want to be part of this community. I want to learn more, and kind of take baby steps in terms of that process. I also think it's to kind of like, there's certain do's and don'ts for personal branding. I think it's important to not try to steal contacts or stalk people. It's very easy to tell how that is done. And so I think there's definitely some pros and cons when it comes to personal branding that we need to be aware of and follow as well in social media. But I think what we need to be aware of is, going into 2018, what are some things that we need to do to kind of be our best advocate? We work with clients in PR campaigns and social media campaigns. We tell our students that they need to be proactive in terms of working with clients as well for class projects. But I also think we are also our most important client as well for ourselves. And how do we best tell our story effectively using all of the social media platforms? So one person that I think really does a very good job of this, that I would really recommend following, is Lynn Humphrey. So he actually is a assistant professor in marketing, but he does a lot of work in social, and he really has a consistent presence across the board. But what I like about what he does is he has a balance between sharing content that's relative, related to his interest in research and teaching, but he also is a real human being. Sometimes you see in social media that there's some people that just share content and you really don't know if it's a bot or if they're just curating content just for the sake of curating content. But he is actively, natively working and talking and discussing with his community. And he's willing to share resources with people, which for me is a big thing that we need more of. But he has a really great interview. One resource that I recommend looking at is HubSpot's new podcast. It's called The Teacher's Lounge, and it's available on iTunes and SoundCloud. And he has a really good podcast to kind of show his approach to digital marketing, his teaching. And I think it's really cool to kind of see how he's really built his own personal brand accordingly. So I do have his contact information if you guys want to follow up with him. But if you just search Lynn Humphrey, he's at Florida International University, and he's really awesome. So the other last tip that I have is becoming your own media brand. And so being able to embrace the media culture, like it's not only being on Facebook or Twitter, but really how do we become like all encompassing, reaching all these digital touch points? Like where do we need to be in 2018 as educators? Do we need to have a blog? Do we need to be on LinkedIn? Do we need to be actively engaged in Twitter chats? Do we need to have our own personal public profile Facebook page? What are the expectations? And I think it is important for us to have multiple touch points for our personal brand going forward. And we do want to make sure that we have ownership of our, of course, usernames, but we also want to create and share content that is relatable and relevant for audiences. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time to do that. You can schedule some time each day. I actually have a reminder on my phone to tell me, okay, here's, the only amount of time that you have to kind of schedule things out or share content or read content. So I do kind of program that in my day. But fundamentals to have, I think it's important to have a website, blog. I think those are still owned media platforms are really important. And I think having a consistent Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn page is important. And you might want to have like your own community. I've seen a rise in basically people hosting their own communities, whether it's their student alums from their classes or with other colleagues or having participated in Twitter chats. Podcasts are kind of, it depends on if you want to do that, if you have time. I mean, it's not required, but what you want to do is what feels naturally for you. I don't have a podcast, but I do have a blog, and I feel like that's a good touch point to be able to show what I'm doing, what I'm working on. So it really comes down to what is manageable for you, what you like, and that fits your own personal brand and what you feel you can sustainably keep up. And so the two professors that I have here that I think really do a good job in different ways is Keith Quisenberry and Carolyn Kim. And they both are professors. They're contributors to various blogs. I know Keith contributes to Harvard Business Review and Social Media Examiner. Carolyn May Kim has contributed to Public Relations Society of America and a few other blogs. And so I think both of them are basically their own media brands. They have their own websites. They have their own blogs. They're very active in the industry, but they're kind of the modern day PR educator in my mind. They have books. I'm actually using both of their social media books in my classes in the spring, and they really are they have all the checks marks. They're researchers, they're educators, they're professionals, they are their own media company. And so I think some of these examples could kind of show us, okay, here are some people that we can kind of look to, see what they're doing well, what are things that we could possibly take, that ideas from and implement into our own media brand for ourselves. And so I think Keith and Carolyn are definitely great examples of individuals that really have embraced social and created their own essentially media brand company. And so I also have here the kind of a revised version of the PEZO model, the paid, earned, shared, and owned media that Ginny Dietrich created for Spin Sucks. And basically, it kind of outlines what are some things that we as public relations, social media educators can implement ourselves in the day and age where we have our own media content. We have, basically our webinars. We have like this webinar that we're doing right now, assignments, resources, our blog and website. But then, kind of explore, well, how do we target individuals that we want to allow them to see our content? If there's perhaps like on Facebook, if you want to target certain industry professionals about what you're doing in and out of the classroom, if you're doing a keynote talk, like, should you do a sponsored post? Should you send a Facebook ad? what are some of the paid sponsorships that you want to do if you get to that influencer level. But then also earned media, like if there's any reviews, any course evaluations or presentation evaluations that you've done that you can kind of showcase and say, wow, I got this review. You get any features, any art, interviews that you've done through television or through blog posts or news articles. That's great. And then shared media, I would put down community groups, guest speaker updates, if you're doing any virtual talks to other classes, and then, if you're on any expert lists. So, I mean, really, this is not kind of a set in stone kind of framework, but it kind of allows you kind of moving forward to 2018 as a professor, kind of looking at, okay, how can I become a micro influencer? How can I adapt to be a social media connector? How can I create opportunities to become my own media brand moving forward as a professor? So what I want to do is kind of summarize a little bit, and I have a couple of resources that I'll briefly go over, but I think, both social media education, both research as a professor is rising, and we are definitely seeing more emphasis in this, which is great. We can all be influencers. I think that's really important, but I think what we can't do is just wait around and wait for someone to reach out to us. We need to be active in searching for opportunities. And it's about also being engaged in the conversation. I think more and more we're seeing that we can't just talk about social media. We can't say, okay, I've done this research project or I teach social media. We have to show impact. We have to show what we've been able to do with our students in the classroom, what we're able to do with consulting projects, with clients, and how our research is making a difference in the industry. So I think along with advocating for a personal brand, we have to advocate for the impact and the results that we're able to bring to the table, similar to what we see in the classroom with our students with measurable objectives, KPIs. We have to kind of look at that as well for ourselves as professors in 2018. And I think most often, I think we can all learn together. The more we share, the more we grow as a profession. And I know when I started teaching social media, I had several professors that were really good in sharing their resources and really helping me along the way. But unfortunately, I had a few professors that were very closed, that they said, okay, these are my ideas. These are the only things that I want to do. And I think in this day and age where this field is changing so much, we need to work together. We need to collaborate. We need to bounce around ideas and say, what did we learn from this assignment? What did we learn from this experience? Here's some resources to help others, because otherwise the field is not going to grow. And this is a global issue. And so it's been fun for me to learn from other professors in other countries to kind of see what they're experiencing, how they're approaching teaching social media, because it's different. And we're all learning together and part of this great community. So I have some research that I've done here on articles, and so if, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but if you guys have questions about the state of social media pedagogy and research and education, I've done a few articles, and I can point some other directions for other work that's been done by some great researchers. I do want to point out in the journal Communication Teacher, there actually was a special issue last year just on social media in the classroom. And so we are seeing a lot more articles and research being done in this area, which has been really great. And so I think that we're only going to see more and more of this research being published. And there's some really great insights that some of these professionals have done. And so, but this is just the list that I've done over the years. I do have a couple of resources to note. I love sharing resources. So I have this slide and then the next slide. There's a lot of professors that are really doing some amazing things. I think Karen Sutherland, we've had various conversations. She's actually in Australia. And back and forth, I've been really impressed with the work that she's been able to do in social media, and we bounced around ideas of the research that she's done. And so it's been a lot of fun to kind of see what projects she's been able to work on. And just a few others. I mentioned Carolyn Kim. I do think Jeremy Lipschultz, he's written a new book called Social Media Communication. That's really good. And there's just a few other people that I think would be really good to connect with. Matt Cushion is one that if you're looking for resources like blog assignments, approaches to using new certification tools, if you just search for Matt Cushion, his website and blog, you will be amazed. Like, he has probably one of the best blogs out there, and he shares his syllabi, he shares his assignments, his lecture notes. I mean, he's the whole deal. Eric Stoller from Inside Higher Education is a professional, but he's very passionate about the state of higher ed and social media, digital skill sets. And so he writes for Inside Higher Education, and he's out in the UK. And then Mark is the one that he's a dean at Hofstra University, but he oversees MEO jobs. So it's a free newsletter. He updates it all the time with new internship and job opportunities. He has his own community that I'll share in a little bit, but it's great. I also found that, with Twitter chats, I love Twitter chats. I think they're really great resources. We have the one that I've been using to share relevant social media articles and updates is ACPRESS, but we also have PR professors, which is PR profs. But there's so many great industry-sponsored Twitter chats that I think are really important. Twitter Smarter and Social ROI. Madeline Scott is fantastic. They're really good resources. Hootsuite and Adobe have their own chat. So does Buffer. Measure PR is hosted by Shanali Burke, a great PR educator. PR Student Chat is overseen by Valerie Simon and Deidre Breckenridge, and they focus on student-related PR trends. And so it's been really cool. They have a lot of social media topics. And then KSSM and HESM are other tools specifically to higher education and social media. So these are great Twitter chats just to kind of follow and monitor to see what people are talking about and listening to. I do have some additional links. So I have some podcasts that you might want to look at. Josie, who I featured earlier, has a great higher education and learning podcast. The Teacher's Lounge is by HubSpot, and I have a few other industry-related podcasts with Twitter Smarter and Social Media Examiner. They're both really good podcasts. And so if you like, listening to podcasts while you're traveling or on the job or working out, those are really good. Stephen Waddington and Sarah Hall, both from the UK, they have a community called Future PR or Future Proof, and they're really good. And I have some certifications that if you wanted to integrate into the classroom, Hootsuite is one that I've used a lot of times. HubSpot has one. They're going to have a new social media marketing certificate that's going to start next year. So I think that'll be good. Google Analytics, Mailwater, Facebook Blueprint is their Facebook specific certification. BrandWatch for students. So BrandWatch is a enterprise listening platform, but they do have a free certification. That is, so if you're teaching analytics or social media listening for your PR classes, that would be a good certification to look at. It's, basically free for students, and they get an access to another platform. And then I have some specific communities. One thing that I found that I think is going to be still prevalent in 2018 is the rise of Facebook kind of exclusive, closed, or even secret groups where people come together, share ideas based on similar interests. And so there's one called Adobe Spark Insiders. And so I wanted to point this particular group out because if you're graphically, looking at like, okay, I'm not an expert in Adobe Illustrator, I'm not an expert in Adobe Photoshop. Adobe has a set of tools called Adobe Spark, which basically they're mobile based, but they're free. There's one for like responsive web pages, for posts that you can create and share on social media platforms, and then video. And so they actually have an insider group that basically allows people to get exclusive updates on the platform, but it's really good if you wanted to kind of touch base and connect with the industry, especially with Adobe. They're really good. So if you guys have questions about that group, let me know, and I definitely would be happy to talk more about that. There is a social media masterminds group that has, I think, over 3,000 members of just social media professionals. So if you're interested to kind of look at what the industry is looking at and talking about, you can definitely join that group on Facebook. So all of these are Facebook groups. We have Facebook Educators. We have HubSpot has one. I do have the link for the social media professors group that I'm a part of. So I'd love to have you guys join us. And then we have MEO Jobs Community and then a Future Prof group as well. That's an open group. So again, I love shared resources. I'm an open book. I think it's really fun to share and help others. And so I have my email address here too. If anyone has any questions or I want this to be used as a jumping off point. Like if there's anything that I could do to help out, please let me know. I'm here always as a resource, and I have my Twitter account as well. So I guess I'll open it up to questions and comments.
Wow, thanks, Karen. You know, it's just such an interesting area, isn't it? And there's such a range of approaches and experience within the professoriate, you know, internationally. So, but I'll open up to questions. Has anyone got any questions for Karen? If you do, just unmute your button.
Thanks, Karen. It's Leanne Glennie here from Adelaide. Karen, that was fascinating. I'm overwhelmed, and I think perhaps any lack of questions is because we're all just absorbing the detail that you gave us. I'm interested, though, in you're talking about the need for win-wins, you know, when we connect with industry in particular. And I do find it a little hard to find what I can provide to industry, you know, that's of value to them, and selling that. Do you have any ideas along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question, Leanne. And I really appreciate you reaching out to that, because I was actually in the same boat as well. And I realized just, you know, what I did is I kind of went in with the notion like, okay, I'm going to come in as just a professor. And basically my first question was, what can I do to help you? You know, I basically started that off like with my conversations with Hootsuite. And what I found was, again, I kind of took the approach of a qualitative researcher. I wanted to say, tell me what you were looking for. Tell me your biggest challenges. So what they basically said, what kind of sparked a few years ago, was they were having trouble justifying the impact that their certifications were having. And so the little light bulb came up. I'm like, well, why don't we do a research project to explore, do interviews, test a pre-test and post-test of our students. So I worked with 4 other researchers, and we created this research article, you know, and we presented it. And what I found with industry is that they crave research. Okay. They crave insight and a third person opinion, because they, you know, they get their client work, they get individuals that say, oh yes, you're doing a great job in strategies. But when they can say, okay, we are still respected as educators, and that with our research and understanding, they're like, okay, tell us what you think. And so what we need to be aware of is how we can provide value to that. So it's not maybe necessarily financial value that they're looking for. It's more kind of that informational guidance value. So I think I would say start off with reaching out to people, reaching out to brands and agencies that you feel would be good to start with. And so I've had friends that have done their areas of work have been nonprofits. And so they go to nonprofits. Yeah. So for me, I found actually the best source of, you know, impact has been with sports and athletic teams, because they're under high amounts of pressure to, you know, be the latest and greatest in social media. So I basically said, let me provide my 2 cents. And so those 2 cents lead to more conversations, to possible collaborations, where I was able to actually do an influencer mini event campaign for Adidas. And I think these micro moment exchanges lead up to these big things. This didn't happen overnight. But if you are interested, what I could do, I have my email address. So if you want, and I'm going to leave this open to everyone, if you wanted to email me saying, hey, here's kind of where I'm looking at, here's the areas and brands, agencies that I'm kind of looking at, how would you approach it? Like, or what would be some other things that I could do to kind of, you know, say, hey, I want this to create a win-win situation. And I'd be happy to bounce around ideas, say, have you thought about this approach? Have you thought about asking this? That's the beauty part about, I think, in this industry, there's so many opportunities. So those are just some of the things that I can think of, but I'd love to continue this conversation and help out in any way I can.
Thanks, Karen. I'd love to continue it as well. So I'll be in touch.
Awesome. Great.
Anyone else for Karen? We'll go a few minutes over time. If you have to drop off, anyone's feel free to drop off, but we've got Mel. Any advice about bringing government along, who are incredibly slow to change and risk averse? Yeah, high five, Mel. So Karen, have you got any advice about government, bringing government along?
Yes. Well, I actually, my sister works for the government. So, yeah, I mean, I think too that they are definitely, it's interesting. It depends on what type of branch of the government that you're looking at and what are their obstacles and stuff. And so I do think that some industries are a little bit slower than others to adapt, but I do think it just comes down to the same conversation, reaching out. And sometimes what we have to be aware of is there's going to be some doors that will be challenging to open. But I think just kind of being persistent is going to be important. If someone says no, that means not it's the end of the world. You just say, okay, that's maybe no for now. But maybe reach out to them again and just, provide them with more information about what you're doing and kind of showcase. So what you also have to think about with government, with these professionals, is look at them like you would in a campaign and say, okay, we have this individual. Who are people that are possibly influencing them? If we want to talk to a particular government official, like looking at maybe we should reach out to people that they trust, that influence them. And that's one of the things that we are seeing with influencer marketing is that it would be hard to look at, okay, basically maybe targeting Beyonce, for example. What we need to be aware of is, okay, who is influencing Beyonce? Who are the people that basically are the ones telling her, hey, you need to talk to this person or something. So the same thing kind of applies with government is we need to look at kind of the outer level circles of community members and advocates that they trust and then work our way in to get that connection with the person that we're looking at. So it might take some time. But it is something that I know just in, experience on the government side may take a little bit longer than other industries, at least from what I've seen here in the U.S.
Cool. Thanks, Karen. I have a question, but I'll let anyone else ask first. No, so my question, Karen, is about centralisation of clearance processes within organisations, because that's one of the big things that seems to be, it provides pressure within, we can come up with all these innovative ways to do social media and encourage students to learn about social media. And then they go and work for an organisation where everything's got to be cleared and, they just don't have that freedom of movement or freedom of action, and they get very frustrated. And certainly that's also the case. It's getting better with universities, but it's also we've come out of a place in universities where we've been very much tied down to what we say or accountable to the larger organisation. So any tips or comments in relation to that you've experienced?
Yeah, actually, I mean, because we actually find that a lot with our students, actually, with kind of, they have these great innovative ideas, but then they are told, okay, we're at this point. And so they're seeing this across industries as well. I've had students that have worked for nonprofits to major event organizations. And so what I've had to tell students in the past is that, you need to be aware of what's happening in the industry, but you also have to be aware of where your organization is standing and say, okay, we're at this point, here's the point where we're at, and then see what are some of the things that we need to do to kind of take this forward. And so what I found with my own students is that they've gone to those similar places where, they learn about some of these innovative new tools and these various apps, but then they are basically sidelined, like, no, we're just doing Facebook. We're not doing Instagram. We're not doing Twitter. We don't have a YouTube channel. But then all of a sudden what they've realized is they're there in their job for a few months. And then all of a sudden, their bosses who told them, yeah, we're only Facebook. They're like, okay, why aren't we on Instagram? Why aren't we on Twitter? So I tell my students that, you may be in a situation where the culture is very much like, everything has to get approved. Everything has to go through legal. But then one day you might have a completely shift in the culture and then everyone's like, oh my God, we got to be on everything. So you have to be both consistent and respectful of the culture and the expectations of the process in terms of getting everything approved, but you also have to be comfortable in being agile and being able to adapt through the changes that you're seeing in the culture, whether there's a turnover, whether there's an issue related to maybe a merger that's happening with a new organization. So the policies that are in place are different from what they were. So I think the big thing is just being agile and adaptive. And so I try to integrate that kind of mindset more in my classes. And so it's challenging for the students who are just very used to doing one thing one way, or they have an idea of what things should be. It's like, no, you got to understand and respect the culture, understand the environment, understand appreciate the process, but also be willing to adapt if necessary. So, but we are seeing this also in the U.S. a lot.
Yeah, great.
In specific industries, especially those that are regulated, because there's certain industries like our healthcare industry. Yeah, you have to go through all sorts of things to make sure that you're not going against privacy rights, you know, and data information protection. There's a lot of things that you just can't do. So, yeah, but that's a really great question.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah, it's just such a challenging area. So maybe one final question from everyone before we hit Facebook and Twitter. No? Well, thank you very much, Karen. What time is it over there for you?
It is actually, I'm actually in California. I'm here for the holidays visiting my family. So it is actually 6:30 in the evening Tuesday. So when I was telling my folks that I was doing a great webinar in Australia, I was like, okay, it's going to be Wednesday, Tuesday for me. And so my mom, she's also Dr. Freberg. I call her the original Dr. Freberg. And she was like, I'm like, I don't get time zones. And I'm like, well, our phones come into play and say, yes, this is the exact time, you know, that we're going to be doing. So no, but it's been wonderful talking to you guys. And I also feel really excited too. I wanted to share this with you guys too. I'm actually going on sabbatical, not into 2018, but 2019. And it actually is going to be in Australia. So I hope to be able to see you guys in the future.
Well, we'll have to keep in touch and find out a way to network and bring you into our fold, because we work across time zones. This is kind of like an emerging network for us, this ACPRESS seminar network. So yeah, love to have you on board. And our next part 2 of our session will be in February, so it'll be along a similar theme. And yes, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
So I'll now upload this into our ACPRESS site. I'll send out all the details and the PowerPoint slides to the network. For anyone who wants to be part of the mailing list, who's not normally part of the mailing list, then by all means, please send me an email and I will add you to the mailing list. So yeah, thanks, Karen. Enjoy California.
Thank you very much. Well, you guys have a great day, and thank you again for this wonderful opportunity. It was a pleasure talking with you guys.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone. See everyone later.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.